4 วันครับเป็นสำหรับภาครัฐนะครับก็ได้รับการตอบรับอย่างดีครับเนื้อหาเนี่ยจะค่อนข้างอัดแน่นครับคราวนี้ทางวิทยากรก็ได้ขยายผลในรุ่นที่2ครับซึ่งเป็นโอกาสที่ดีที่ทางผู้ประกอบการครับภาคเอกชนแล้วก็ผู้มีส่วนได้เสียทุกท่านนะครับเนี่ยที่สนใจครับก็สามารถเข้ามารับฟังในหัวข้อนี้ได้ครับแล้วก็ถ้ามีประเด็นถามตอบที่เป็นเรื่องของการค้าสินค้าประมงระหว่างประเทศเนี่ยก็สามารถที่จะลิสต์คำถามไว้ได้ครับหรือว่าถ้าไม่สะดวกในช่วงนั้นเนี่ยอาจจะแจ้งมาทางอีเมลของกรมประมงทิ้งไว้ได้ครับเราก็จะมีการประสานงานเอ่อส่งไปให้ทาง FAO สำนักงานใหญ่ครับซึ่งเป็นองค์กรที่ดูเรื่องของอาหารและเกษตรแห่งสหประชาชาติของโลกนี้นะครับซึ่งในพาร์ทเนี่ยจะเป็นมุ่งไปเรื่องของการค้าสินค้าประมงนะครับเป็นหลักแต่ว่าก็จะมีองค์ความรู้อื่นๆตั้งแต่พื้นฐานของเรื่องการค้ามีทั้งมาตรการต่างๆภาษีกิจการทางภาษีต่างๆครับที่มีความสำคัญครับทางวิทยากรก็อาจจะใช้เวลาที่ไม่นานมากตรงนี้ครับพยายามรวบลัดให้ทุกท่านเนี่ยได้รับประโยชน์ในส่วนนี้นะครับตามหัวข้อที่มีในวันนี้นะครับแล้วก็ตามที่ได้แจ้งไว้ในตัวประกาศครับผู้ที่ลงทะเบียนเนี่ยก็จะได้รับตัวใบประกาศจากทาง FAO นะครับซึ่งจะส่งผ่านทางอีเมลที่ลงทะเบียนไว้นะครับ ก็รบกวนตอนลงทะเบียนเนี่ยก็จะเห็นชื่อครับว่าของเราถูกต้องหรือไม่ครับจะออกเป็นภาษาอังกฤษไว้นะครับก็จะเก็บไว้เป็นเกียรติแก่ทุกท่านนะครับสามารถจะไปใช้อ้างอิงต่างๆได้ครับแล้วก็สิ่งสำคัญครับในการฝึกอบรมครั้งนี้ครับก็จะมีการบันทึกเป็นไฟล์ดิจิทัลไว้ครับสามารถที่จะเข้าผ่านช่องทางสถานีของกรมประมงได้ครับเดี๋ยวจะมีการส่งลิงก์ส่งข้อมูลต่างๆเนี่ยให้ทางอีเมลที่ลงทะเบียนไว้ครับเบื้องต้นก็จะเป็นเรื่องของสถานีประมงต้นแบบครับ ก็จะมีรายละเอียดของหัวข้อต่างๆเนี่ยให้ทางผู้ที่สนใจเนี่ยได้เข้ารับฟังการบรรยายหรือว่าดูผลการดำเนินงานของกรมประมงต่างๆนะครับแล้วก็ยังมีการบันทึกไว้ในการฝึกอบรมครั้งนี้ครับทั้งในรุ่นที่1รุ่น2และรุ่น3ครับก็สามารถดูย้อนหลังได้ครับเพื่อใช้ประโยชน์ในด้านต่างๆตามภารกิจของหน่วยงานของท่านนะครับครับผมครับ สวัสดีครับสวัสดีทุกท่านนะครับตอนนี้เวลา9 โมงครึ่งนะครับก็หลังจากลงทะเบียนครับก็จะมีผู้เข้าร่วมประชุมที่อยู่ในห้องประชุมนะครับแล้วก็ห้องในระบบออนไลน์นะครับครับผมขออนุญาตนำเรียนข้อมูลเบื้องต้นสั้นๆนะครับก็ตอนนี้จริงๆบางส่วนเนี่ยจะมีการทยอยเดินทางมาอยู่บ้างนะครับเนื่องจากวันนี้เป็นวันศุกร์ด้วยระยะทางก็อาจจะไกลครับตอนนี้เลยใช้เวลาในช่วงลงทะเบียนช่วงเช้าเนี่ยประมาณ9 โมงครึ่งของรุ่นที่2นะครับซึ่งเป็นหลักสูตรสำหรับภาคเอกชนนะครับอย่างนั้นถ้าเอ่อตามเวลาครับผมจะขออนุญาตทุกท่านเนี่ยเอ่อเริ่มเริ่มเริ่มเข้าสู่การเอ่อฝึกอบรมนะครับในเรื่องของหลักสูตรการค้าสินค้าประมงระหว่างประเทศและผลผลิตจากการเพาะเลี้ยงสัตว์น้ำนะครับสำหรับรุ่นที่2เนี่ยจัดขึ้นในวันนี้ครับวันที่30สิงหาคมครับในช่วงเวลา9โมงถึงเที่ยงนะครับซึ่งการลงทะเบียนเนี่ยจะเริ่มที่9โมงถึง9 โมงครึ่งนะครับ แล้วก็มีกำหนดการเนี่ยคาดว่าจะเสร็จสิ้นภายในเที่ยงวันนี้นะครับ โดยมีผู้ลงทะเบียนในห้องประชุมนะครับแล้วก็ผ่านระบบออนไลน์เนี่ยรวม60กว่าท่านนะครับซึ่งตอนนี้เอ่อจะขออนุญาตเข้าสู่หัวข้อในการฝึกอบรมในครั้งนี้นะครับ ในลำดับแรกครับขออนุญาตแนะนำวิทยากรครับจากทาง FAO สำนักงานใหญ่ครับหรือองค์กรอาหารและเกษตรแห่งสหประชาชาตินะครับอ่าที่เดินทางมาที่ประเทศไทยครับเพื่อให้ความรู้ความเข้าใจของเราในเรื่องของการค้าสินค้าประมงระหว่างประเทศนะครับจำนวน2ท่านนะครับได้แก่มิสเตอร์มาซิโอคาสโตเดอซัวซาครับแล้วก็มิสบัตติอันนันต์นะครับวิทยากรจากFAO สำนักงานใหญ่ครับ ซึ่งในวันนี้ก็จะมีผู้เข้าร่วมประชุมเนี่ยจะเป็นภาคเอกชนครับผู้ประกอบการต่างๆนะครับทั้งบริษัทที่เกี่ยวข้องในเรื่องของการค้าสินค้าประมงระหว่างประเทศโดยตรงนะครับแล้วก็เป็นบริษัทที่อาจจะเห็นโอกาสในเรื่องของการค้าตรงนี้ครับว่าอาจจะมีขยายผลต่างๆนะครับซึ่งในหัวข้อตรงนี้ก็จะเป็นถือว่าเป็นประโยชน์ในสิ่งที่ทุกท่านจะได้รับไปปรับใช้หรือว่าเห็นเป็นภาพรวมของแนวโน้มในเรื่องการค้าสินค้าประมงระหว่างประเทศนะครับ ตอนที่ผมดูในความพร้อมของห้องประชุมกับเรื่องของในระบบออนไลน์ครับก็น่าจะเรียบร้อยครับในเรื่องของออนไลน์เนี่ยทุกท่านสามารถที่จะดาวน์โหลดตัว Zoom Background ได้นะครับขออนุญาตให้ข้อมูลอีกรอบนะครับซึ่งจะอยู่ในตัวลิงก์ที่มีการเผยแพร่ไว้ในช่วงแรกของ QR Code นะครับแต่ถ้าไม่สะดวกเนี่ยก็สามารถจะเปิดหรือปิดกล้องตามสมควรนะครับแต่ถ้าเป็นช่วงแรกๆเนี่ยเพื่อให้วิทยากรได้เห็นทุกท่านเนี่ยก็ขออนุญาตเปิดกล้องไว้ด้วยนะครับ ทั้งนี้ครับผมขออนุญาตเชิญทางคุณมาซิโอครับได้ให้ข้อมูลในช่วงของการไปฝึกอบรมเลยนะครับขอบคุณมากครับ
private sector. And the idea of this seminar is going to be to provide you with a global picture of what. Sorry, slightly crap again. I think it's working. Good morning. On behalf of FAO, we would like to thank the Department of Fisheries of Thailand. And it's a great pleasure for us to be here addressing the private sector in terms of the idea of this seminar is going to be presenting to all of you the most recent trade and trends involving production and also trade of fisheries and aquaculture products. We are going to go through the biggest numbers, but also we are going to highlight some important elements that are associated with challenges and opportunities associated with fisheries and aquaculture products. Again, just would like to reiterate that FAO is very pleased to be here during this week with the Department of Fisheries of Thailand, and in particular, today when we have the chance to discuss and also to listen to the private sector needs and concerns involving the sector, particularly from an international trade perspective. Uh, just to introduce myself a little bit more, my name is Márcio de Souza. I'm a senior fishery officer in FAO, responsible for international trade and markets of fisheries and aquaculture products. And I'm also the secretary of the subcommittee on fish trade in FAO when we put together all countries in the world to discuss trade issues directly or indirectly associated with trade. So the idea today, as I mentioned to you, is to showcase what FAO does, what kind of data we collect. But I'm going to pose you maybe I think 2 questions or 3 questions throughout the whole presentation. So you can scan this QR code here. And we have to go to Mentimeter. You can scan the QR code, or you can go to menti.com and type this code here. Those are the 2 ways that you can access the question that I'm going to pose. You can go to menti.com and type this code, or scan the QR code. I hope that's working. We are going to open here now the Mentimeter, and I think you're already seeing one question. That's the first one. And the idea is exactly how to see your perception, if any, about FAO. We are let's go just to the okay. So we have, can you hide the answers, please? So we have the question, if you are aware of what FAO does. And because, of course, we are going to talk a lot about the FAO perspective on fish trade, on fish production, but what FAO does. That's an important aspect for us to realize. We have 23 answers so far. When you reach 25, we are going to show the results. So more 2 to go. It's a little bit stuck in 23. Maybe we can show 24. Maybe we can show the results, Bhakti, please. Okay, so I'm completely aware. It's almost equal to what I think I have a slight idea about it. And 2, we have no idea about what FAO does. So I'm going to put a very introductory slide to talk about a little bit about FAO. So it's quite important for us to understand that we are one of the specialized agencies of the United Nations. So our idea is to support countries from a global context. However, we can indeed, like the activity that we are carrying right now here in Bangkok, we can indeed act at a national level, but we have some fundamentals. So it's, as I mentioned before, we are a permanent specialized agency. It was established in 1944, and all the objectives of FAO, they are around food. So the idea is that we exist to eliminate hunger, improve nutrition, improve standards of living, increasing productivity. You see here that all of the 4 objectives listed here, they are directly and indirectly linked to fisheries. That's quite important to observe. Nowadays in FAO, we do have a policy that we call the 4 betters. Is better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better life, leaving no one behind. If you can see from here, this policy reflects exactly those objectives. And that's quite important for us. So the idea of FAO in providing national support to countries, in providing capacity building activities, in providing technical assistance, in even participating in seminars, events, together with the private sector, is exactly to increase the level in terms of quality of production, nutrition, environment, and life, trying to not leave anyone behind. That's one of our main mottos. And in terms of areas in FAO, we are divided based in those 4 areas: agriculture, fisheries, forestry, and land and water resources. And of course, as I mentioned before, we try to support governments, particularly in developing countries, as much as possible in terms of information, in terms of techniques, in terms of guidance, in order to implement sustainable practices in terms of increased productivity, in terms of having better standards, in terms of production, in terms of employment, etc. That's a very synthetic picture of what FAO does. And what about fisheries and aquaculture in FAO? So what is the situation of fisheries and aquaculture in FAO? In FAO, we do have a policy in the area of fisheries, what we call blue transformation. By the way, this is the part of the building of FAO here. That's the FAO flag. And in this policy that we have in the fisheries area that we call blue transformation, we have basically 3 different areas: fisheries, value chains, and aquaculture. And I have put here just the main objective that we foresee in each area. So for fisheries, we try to support countries in order to have an effective management of all fisheries. We all know, and we are going to see that in more details later, we all know how the sustainability of the stocks is a very complicated and challenging element, but FAO tries to support countries in order to have effective management of all fisheries. In aquaculture, we are going to see also the growth of aquaculture, but FAO tries to support countries in order to expand aquaculture on a sustainable basis. That's one of our core elements. And in value chains, which is the area that I work with international trade, the idea is to upgrade value chains. What do we mean by upgrade value chains? The idea is to bring more productivity, more effectiveness in terms of reducing food loss and waste, improving international trade, enhancing international trade, but also dealing with food safety issues, dealing with antimicrobial resistance, for example. That's a very serious problem. Trying to support countries in reducing the technical barriers of trade and all the elements that impose restrictions in the free flow of fisheries and aquaculture products. And the idea of FAO is to support countries, but not only countries, we can indeed support the private sector, again, in events, associated with the national government, in order to have concerted actions on a sustainable basis to build fisheries, aquaculture, and value chains on a sustainable way. When you think about sustainability, there is an international parameter for sustainability that we have to think about sustainability from three pillars: economic, environmental, and social. And one thing that it's quite interesting in the area of fisheries and aquaculture is how important fisheries and aquaculture is for the three pillars of sustainability: economic, environmental, and social. And we are going to see that in the next slides. So one thing that I'm going to mention is that most of the information that I'm going to mention here in this seminar, in terms of figures, in terms of data, it's available in one of the FAO flagship publications called The State of the World Fisheries and Aquaculture. This publication we issue every 2 years with information about statistics, about new issues affecting the sector, a lot of analysis about the sector. It's a quite rich publication, and I really encourage all of you to read it. You can download, scanning here the QR code. When you look at the fisheries production, that's fisheries production. I'm not talking here on aquaculture. So it's only marine and inland waters. And this is go back to 1960. So when you go for fisheries production, you can see that it has increased dramatically until the 80s and 2000. You see here a very steep curve. But then we have seen fisheries and aquaculture more or less stable at a plateau here, navigating around this figure. That's a very important element to save for the moment, because that's the latest number that we have consolidated. And you see here that it's more or less stable around the top line here in this graph. That's for fisheries. But when you look at aquaculture production, we see a growth starting much later in the 90s and 2000, with a very, very steep increase here in 2010, 2015. And then we continue to climb the ladder. You can see here that there is a clear trend of aquaculture production increasing. So what we are seeing at the moment in the world is that wide capture fisheries is relatively stable, while aquaculture production is increasing constantly throughout the years. And let's put the two together. So now this bar, the total of the bar, represents 100%. So in the 1955, aquaculture was a small, tiny fraction of this bar, and fisheries was the vast majority of it. And then we go through the years, and then we can see clearly the orange bar growing. And now we reach in 2021 the year that we have half and half. So half of the production in the world comes from aquaculture, and half of the production comes from wide capture. That's a quite important milestone that we have reached. And we are going to see more in terms of what does that mean in terms of fishing production. Those are the major producers in terms of total fisheries and aquaculture production. China is not here because it creates a lot of distortion in the graph. So excluding China. And then we have all the producers here with fisheries and aquaculture. You can see Thailand here, and many Asian countries, and we are going to see why in a few moments. So this is the share, and this is the total, the quantity in billion of tons. And when you think about, I mentioned to all of you that fisheries production is relatively stable, while aquaculture is always increasing in the last years. One of the reasons why we see fisheries production relatively stable is exactly the status of the fish stocks around the world. So when you see that only 77.2% of the stocks of the world, they are underfished. If you combine this number with the stocks that are fished at sustainable levels, we have 64.5%. So minus 100, so 35.4% of the stocks, they are overfished. And more alarming is that the overfished stocks, they are increasing throughout the years. That's the bad picture here. You see here, the red area is increasing in the last years. Though the green area and the blue area are fine, are stocks that are fished at the maximum sustainable yield or underfished. But the red area is increasing here. So although the overall picture is not so good, there is a very interesting positive figure when we talk about the stock status. And what's the positive figure? When you look at the status of tuna, for example, when you look at the landings of tuna in the world, we see that around 80% of them are sustainable. So what does that mean? When you talk about a high value commercial species like tuna, and you see that the majority of the landings, a high percentage of the landings are sustainable, it's a clear recognition of the importance and the positive result of fisheries management. So countries that implement fisheries management policies, regional fisheries management organization, which is the case that the tuna is usually governed by regional fisheries management organization, they implement fisheries management policies, and as a result, we have a very positive sustainability level. One thing also to notice is that this alarming figure that I'm showing here is the global picture. However, when we go for regions, we have some differences. So the blue part of the pie are the sustainable stocks. So you see here that there are some regions in the world that are performing quite well. That's the blue part of the pie. So we do have those statistics. That's also a function of FAO. We do have this figure by country. However, we only disclose these numbers by region. So those are called what we call FAO fishing regions. Area 51, Area 57, which is the one here, and 71, the two areas that are important to Thailand. And so this is a regional picture of sustainability. One thing that is also important when we analyzed the overall scenario of production of fisheries and aquaculture products is the incredible growth of aquatic plant production. You see by this graph here that aquatic plant production was minimum in the 90s and 2000s. And then it starts increasing dramatically too. And of course, the majority is from aquaculture. That's the orange part of this bar. So particularly seaweeds, if we look at the seaweed production, those are the three major seaweed producers: China, Indonesia, and South Korea. And that's the share of their production in total global production. So that's a very interesting aspect in terms of the growth of seaweed production and aquatic plants in general, and also the new use of those seaweeds in terms of cosmetics, as all of you know, in terms of other byproducts that are usually not so associated with fisheries and aquaculture. One thing that is, I mentioned the three dimensions of sustainability. And one important element to realize is that, and again, the idea of this first part of the presentation is to all of us to realize the importance of the sector that we work for. To know that's a very important sector at a national level and particularly at the international level. And sometimes, and I'm going to mention that later, I think, but maybe I'll just advance that. Because I work with fisheries for a while. And I usually say that usually fisheries and aquaculture products, we only are in the front page of a newspaper when there is a problem. We are never there when there is a positive aspect to say about fisheries. No, it's only when there is a problem of pollution in one river that has killed tons of fish. There is a problem with the quality of tuna. There is a problem about shrimp disease, etc. We never go on the front page with a positive aspect. And we have to be conscious that we are very good in terms of production, in terms of economic gains, in terms of social gains, and in terms of an environmental sustainability of the sector. And just to show a little bit about the social angle of fisheries and aquaculture. When you look at the production, we have more than 60 million people directly employed in the world. 65% in capture and 35% in aquaculture. And of those workforce, 84% is in Asia, which is a considerable percentage. In addition to that, 21% of this workforce is women. And I think it's quite interesting to notice that 21% is when we take the whole value chain. But if you look at the processing industry, the canning industry, for example, is much more than 50%. We estimate about 65% when you go for the canning industry. And also, small-scale fisheries plays a very important role in fish production. It's 40% of total catch and 500 million people associated. So that shows the social importance of the activity that we work in terms of employment, in terms of gender inclusion, in terms of small-scale inclusion. But it's also an activity that's quite important in terms of economic terms. So when you look at the first sale of fisheries and aquaculture is $300 billion. And it has been 12% up from the previous reported year. And capture fisheries is 159 billion, 12% up again. So that's a quite significant first sale value for products coming from animal proteins. In addition to that, we have, and we are going to see more of that in details, we have 230 countries and territories that trade fisheries. And the total trade value is $192 billion, which is almost 20% more than the pre-COVID times. And we are going to see the importance of international trade soon. And when we look at the perspective of the population increase around the world, because we are growing globally, the population is always growing. So there is an expectation that aquatic products, so fisheries and aquaculture and aquatic plants, can support the world feeding this population. And this is a projection that we have. So we are here, 2024, but we don't have the data yet compiled. So this is an outlook. But you see here that aquaculture continues to grow. Marginally, constantly, but continues to grow. And capture fisheries, again, is relatively stable around a single line. In this case, it's important that aquaculture can indeed be a good solution to feed with high quality products, nutritional products, this population that is increasing. And that's a very important aspect to take that in consideration. Of course, we are not saying here that capture fisheries is not important. It is. It is important, and it's contributing with almost around 50% of the world capture. However, capture fisheries has some problems in terms of expansion in some regions due to the sustainability of the resources. That's something that we have to take into consideration. This is a very interesting graph because it shows by 2050, if the population continues to increase at the same rate that we have now, and we want to keep the same average consumption of fisheries and aquaculture products in the world, how much each area has to increase its fishing capacity to provide fish to feed this population. So what's the production that Africa, Asia, Europe, America, Latin America, and Oceania, they have to increase their production to keep the same average consumption per capita that we have now, with more people living in the world. And of course, this is a very, and the world is in total, we have to increase by 22%. This is a very interesting graph because, of course, we know that all regions are not able to comply with this increase in terms of fish production. So, but the population is continuing to increase in those regions. So there is here an opportunity for exports of fisheries and aquaculture products from countries that can indeed increase their production. So this graph shows clearly a potential until 2050 in order to feed those regions with national products that can be expanded in some countries in terms of production. And what are the most internationally traded species? And that's something very interesting because one thing that FAO does is that all the statistics that we release, when we talk about international trade, we talk about value, US dollars. When we talk about production, we talk about volume, tonnage. So, and that's something usually we think about tuna as being the most important international group of species that is internationally traded. However, salmon is the most important ones, followed by shrimps. And tuna is this, and then you have tunas, and then you have cods. It's 10% too. So cod and tuna 10%, salmon with 18%, and shrimp and prawns with 16%. Of course, we have all the issue. Sorry. Of course, we have all the issue here of prices because we are analyzing this table based on the value of the export of those products. But that's very interesting to notice that the group salmon and shrimps goes on 40-something%. Is that correct? Yeah, I think so. 30, almost 40%. So that's a very interesting perspective when you think about international trade. And talking about international trade and talking about production around the globe, this map was not done by FAO, it was done by a Rabobank, which is a Dutch bank in the Netherlands. And this map shows the international trade flow of seafood products. So the thicker the line, the flow is bigger. And of course, the arrow indicates the importing country. So you can see here clearly China importing a lot from Peru. This blue line here. Okay, so that's a very interesting graph that shows the overall picture. But we are going to see more details about production and international trade. When you see the production by region, of course, we see the importance of Asia with 70% of the global production. Again, in this circle, the red area is aquaculture, and the blue area is capture fisheries. So when you look at the difference, when you look at the difference between Asia and the second group is huge, 9% to 70%. So it's a well-represented group of countries in terms of production. And the production by region, we can see here clearly that Asia is growing constantly. And then you have Americas and Europe and Africa. China, we have put separately because, of course, China distorts a lot the statistics. So you have China here, the rest of Asia, and the Americas, and then Europe and Africa. You can see that Europe, Africa, in fact, is declining here. Sorry, is expanding. But you can see clearly that Europe is relatively stable, and Asia is increasing here, the area. And when you go for aquaculture, you can see the huge expansion of China in aquaculture production. Asia is relatively stable together with the others in the last years. China is in fact decreasing a little bit in the last years, but you can see from the 90s until today, the huge expansion that they had in aquaculture production. And when you think about the main aquaculture producers, of course, you have China, 56.4, and then other countries there is a huge difference with Indonesia, India, Vietnam, and others. So that's the aquaculture producers. And then when you go for, as I mentioned before, aquaculture has indeed the potential to feed the world in terms of this increasing population growth. You can see here some more detailed statistics about aquaculture production. So Asia, 91.4%, the breakdown of the other regions. And then the growth in the last 22 years, Africa with 8%, Latin America and the Caribbean 7.6%, North America was minimum, Asia 5.2%, Europe 2.5%, Oceania 2.7%, and the world 5.2%. So we are seeing a lot of aquaculture expansion in Latin America, particularly with tilapia. That's something that we have seen lately very strongly. When we talk about aquaculture first, now in terms of capture producers. With almost 50%, we have again China, and then Indonesia, Peru, and India. Of course, Peru, we do have the problem of anchoita, the anchoita effect that we call. It's a small species. And since we are talking here about production, we are taking in consideration here the tonnage. So they capture a lot of anchoita, and that creates also a distortion in terms of the main producers. And then talking about international trade, that's one of the main purposes here is to discuss a little bit international trade. Let's go for another quick question to all of you. Okay. First of all, that's the first question. Is that the one that we have two? I think so, no? Yes. Okay. So do you have any experience with international trade of fisheries and aquaculture products? Yes, it's the main area of my work. Most operations are local, but some are international. We only operate, I think it's nationally. It's missing national here. I hope that in Thai it's correct. We only operate nationally. Okay, we have 6 responses. So let's wait for more since we have a lot of people online. Okay, this is just for us to have an idea about the pattern of attendees that we have. "13 answers and growing." Let's see. "14. When we reach 20, we're going to show the results. People are asking for the QR code. Okay, the QR code is going to be back. Sorry. You can continue to answer there. There is no. So just take your time to scan the QR code. Okay, let's go back to the. Okay, 18. Next time we should put the QR code also in the question that facilitates. 19. 20. Maybe we can show the results. Okay, the main area of my work, the majority with 10. Most operations are local, but some are international. And 4 only operate locally. Locally is at the end of the tie. Sorry about that. Okay, thank you. Let's go for the other question. For the ones that are missing the QR code, you can also type menti.com and use this code here. And since the majority of you have answered that you are exposed somehow to international trade, did you ever encounter any barriers to export fisheries and aquaculture products? Yes, basically involving regulatory requirements, hard to comply with rules of origin to get preferential access. It's written twice in English, sorry. I face other problems, and I'm not an exporter. You can only choose one. If you have more than one option, choose the one that you think you are most affected from. Okay, we have 12 answers so far. Again, if you miss the QR code, you just type menti.com and use this code here to answer the question. 15, 16, growing, and 20. Here you go. Okay, basically involving regulatory requirements. Of course, the ones that are not exporter, and one about rules of origin, which is interesting, and face other problems by 1, 2. That's very interesting, this result about the regulatory issues that create problems to all of you. We can go back to the presentation, and maybe we are going to address some of the issues from now on. So we talk about the producers, and now what are the main exporters? You see that China is producer of aquaculture, producer of fisheries, main exporter. You're going to see it's also a main importer. So it goes everywhere. So you can see here China and Norway. Of course, Norway basically with salmon and cod. Then you have some countries, Chile also with salmon, India with shrimp. It's a very big producer of shrimp in China, in India. And then you have Ecuador and Canada. Ecuador, of course, it's a big competitor in terms of tuna production, also shrimp. But one thing that, I'm sorry, I pressed, okay. One thing that is important is that the top 3, top 4, they are more or less, except for China, but the others, they have been quite stable. Of course, sometimes they change positions here, but they usually are the same. And when you go for the importers, you see China again and the US. So these positions, they usually shift. Sometimes the first one is China, sometimes the first one is the US. It depends on the year. It depends on sometimes of production of specific species in that year. Then you have Japan, and then many countries of the European Union, Spain, France, and Italy. So it's quite important that since we have in the questions, you have replied that some regulatory issues are creating problems in terms of barriers for you to export your fisheries and aquaculture products. It's important to know exactly the import requirements of the US, of China, of Japan, and of the European Union. And we as FAO, we know a lot how complex this can be because the requirements change a lot. Sometimes the requirements, they vary a lot between one country and the other. So it's hard for the private sector to comply with those requirements. This is before joining fisheries a while ago, I worked in the agriculture side. And when I joined fisheries, maybe one of the first statistics that I did was exactly this calculation, and I was completely surprised about that. When you go for the global exports of all animal proteins in the world, of course, since we are talking about exports, we are talking about dollars. So the value of global exports in the world of fish products is 49%. So, and again, that's the issue that I mentioned to all of you about why this information is not part of a headline of a newspaper. That the fishery sector in global terms is equivalent to the sum of beef, pork, and poultry. So the value of the exports of fisheries is almost equivalent to the sum of all and other animal proteins, which is quite amazing. It's surprising, this information. And what about Thailand? This is the latest information that we have. Of course, we compile from different sources. Sorry. We compiled from different sources. So, of course, national information here probably at INBA, it's more updated. But this is the fish consumption per capita in Thailand. We have listened on the first day of the training that we conduct this week, the Director General mentioning that it has submitted to Parliament the project of the policy of increasing this per capita consumption to 26 kilos. We see that fisheries contribute with almost 90% of the total agriculture product, economic product. And here we can see the exports and imports of Thailand in this upper part here, sorry. The red line is exports and the blue line imports of fisheries and aquaculture products. And then we have other data. We see here that the production in Thailand, 59% comes from fisheries and 41% comes from aquaculture. But when you go into more details about this data, from a more generic perspective, we can see that 69% of the production is fish, 22 crustaceans, and 9% mollusks. In terms of value, 80% of the imports are unprocessed products. And 95% of the imports are fish. And we go for exports by value, 76% is processed, which is quite good because that shows that Thailand is adding value to the product before exporting. It's not exporting the of course, it's exporting too, but it's not the majority of the export value. 76% is processed and 24% is unprocessed. And then 58% is fish and 42 is other animal proteins. The production of the 10 top species here, sometimes it appears this NEI because there is no specific classification for the fish that is produced. But you can see here shrimp, tilapia, catfish, squids, mackerel, sardinellas, but in volume, of course. Now, we're not talking about value because it's production. And when you see the destination of exports of the exports of Thailand, we see the United States and Japan as the main destination markets, followed by China, Australia, Canada, Korea, Taiwan, Malaysia, and some European countries here. But there is a clear destination concentration on the US, Japan, China, and Australia. And when you look at what are the products that Thai exports, this is the second column here in yellow. You see tuna, of course, canned tuna. That's the majority, almost 3 times more than shrimps, which is in the second place. And then shrimps, frozen shrimp, prepared shrimp, and then fish, shrimp, prepared shrimp again, squid, sardines, salmon, and shrimps, live, fresh, or chilled. So this is the top 10 exports. When you go for the top 10 imports, you import a lot of bonito, and then squids, mackerel, salmon, yellowfin tuna, shrimps, and then it goes. So this is a very I'm going to show all the links to obtain those information that information because we have done that for all the countries in the world. So you can go for China, you can go for Indonesia, and for other countries just to check what's their profile in terms of fisheries and aquaculture products. In the question that I posed to you, the majority of you responded about the problem, the regulatory problems about accessing international markets. And when you think about market access to international market, what is market access? The idea of market access is a set of external conditions that are set for a product to enter into another market. That's the basic definition of market access. Of course, I'm being very synthetic here, but market access can be set by the importing government, but also some specific demand of buyers. And I'm going to explain that now. Some of the most common market access requirements. When you go for the private sector, for example, we have many cases of supermarkets in the United Kingdom that they only buy certified fish. You have to have IMSC or another any kind of certification in order to sell to those supermarkets. They can do that. Of course they can. They are private companies. I'm saying that I only want to sell to my consumers certified fish. And I'm going to put a premium because I'm just telling to my consumers that I only sell sustainable fish. That's the most normal private sector type of requirement. But of course, we also can have government requirements. And they usually are associated with sanitary and phytosanitary requirements. For example, again, I'm not a biologist or chemistry, but my background is law and economics. But we all know that, for example, the level of histamine in fish products is a very important element in terms of the deterioration of the fish. And the European Union, for example, they have maximum histamine levels in terms of the import of fisheries and aquaculture products. So this kind of SPS and TBT measures that I'm talking about, in terms of legality and traceability, what we are seeing around the world is that the majority of the importing countries, they are every time requiring that exporters should be able to prove that the fish was legally caught and it was traceable until the final destination. So that's why it's becoming quite critical for countries to implement many international instruments that facilitate the work of the business in order to sell their fish and fish products in terms of to prove legality, to support traceability efforts, etc. And of course, we have tariffs. We are going to show very briefly that Thailand is negotiating a free trade agreement with the European Union. So most probably, Thailand is going to have the benefit of the reduction of many items to export to the European Union, including fisheries and aquaculture products. One thing that I just mentioned, the trade agreement, which is called preferential market access. And nowadays, even with, because if we think about the overall flow of fisheries and aquaculture products around the world, this flow usually comes from developing countries to developed countries. So it's usually developing countries selling fisheries and aquaculture products to developed countries. In developed countries, many tariffs are very, very low, import tariffs. However, we still have some high tariffs. For example, if I'm not mistaken, the import tariff for canned tuna in the European Union is 24.5%, which is quite high. So it's quite important for countries to engage in bilateral agreements like the free trade agreement that is currently being negotiated between Thailand and the European Union in order to reduce this import tariff for the countries that are participating in the trade agreement. That's more or less what I have just said. Sorry for that. But this map shows the darker the color is the area of the world that has more trade agreements. So you see Europe, all over Eastern Europe and Asia here, Oceania, North America. And as I mentioned to you, preferential tariffs can be reduced from 10% to 0. That's exactly what I have just mentioned to you. So it's quite important nowadays for countries to try to get some sort of preferential access in order to increase the competitiveness of their products. And one thing that is quite interesting is that using a preferential agreement like the one that is being negotiated with the European Union, the participating countries of the agreement, of the preferential agreement, they have basically two types of benefits. They have, of course, the quantitative benefit, which is the reduction of the import tariff, but at the same time, they have qualitative benefits. And those qualitative benefits sometimes can facilitate a lot about the problems that have been mentioned here about to comply with the regulatory framework. Why? Because the qualitative benefits sometimes, the countries, they recognize, for example, a safety certificate that is already issued here in Thailand, it's going to be recognized in the European Union. So there is a lot of what we call trade facilitation tools that are implemented for mutual recognition of certificates, acceptance of analysis, laboratory analysis in terms of fisheries. So the idea is to create, to reduce exactly the number of barriers between the countries that are part of the trade agreement. I just bought here an example. About one agreement. That's the comprehensive agreement for the Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. Then you have the country's members here. It is expanding. But we just bought that here to show that the trade agreements, they are entering in new areas that is not only related to the facilitation of requirements in terms of reduction of tariffs, but they are entering in other areas of sustainability. They are putting parameters to be observed in terms of illegal fishing, in terms of conservation of marine biodiversity, in terms of issues regarding fisheries pollution, vessel pollution, invasive species, fisheries management, protection of the ozone layer. So this is a very important trend that we are starting to see with these most recent agreements. They are putting trade together with environmental issues, sometimes even including labor conditions, that try to frame the preferential access between the participating countries. So just to bring an example exactly of this kind of agreement, and that's the EU-Thailand Free Trade Agreement, which is still under negotiation. Please, all the elements that I'm going to present here, they are not final elements. It's still under negotiation. The negotiations started in 2023. Now they are negotiating the text of the agreement. And when the text is ready, they are going to start exchanging the list of products to check the reduction of the import tariff. So it's going to be a second stage. If you scan this QR code here, you are going to see already all the parts of the text of the agreement that are being negotiated. Um, and of course, we have that a lot of areas of the agreement, of this agreement, that is under negotiation, that has a direct impact on fisheries. I'm not going to go one by one, but just to own that, for example, rules of origin is a very important aspect of fisheries because it determines where the fish is considered to be caught, in which country, and that is going to be a key element to check if that fish can be exported at a reduced import tariff or not. But then you have another traditional ones like technical barriers to trade, sanitary and phytosanitary measures. But now we have some new areas too, like sustainable food system, competition and subsidies, trade and sustainable development. For example, those three areas are relatively new to trade agreements. In the past, like 10 years ago, 5 years ago, those areas were not associated with trade agreements. They exist because of the international instruments that are associated with those areas, but they were not part of trade agreements. And those these new areas are becoming the new normal of trade agreements. Nowadays, it's like a trend to have new trade agreements incorporating those areas. One thing that is quite important is that it's not only I mentioned the importance of countries getting into international agreements to facilitate the export of fisheries and aquaculture products at a reduced import tariff. However, it's not only be part of the agreement that is going to secure you an access with a reduced import tariff. You have to do your homework, both the private sector and the government. So, first of all, the private sector must be aware of the preferential access that the country is already granted to the products. So we are going to show, I'm going to share at the end a link that you have a lot of resources that you can check that. But one of the very good resources that we use for that is some database, some UN database that show all the trade agreements that the country can be part of. So the private sector must be aware of preferential access conditions. And in addition to that, it's important, after knowing that there is preferential access, to know if the exporting sector can comply with the requirements involved in the preferential access. And again, as I mentioned before, each time more, it's important that countries and the private sector, they work together in terms of the implementation of some instruments that can facilitate this preferential access. So if you look at the FAO Port State Measure Agreements that Thailand has already ratified, the FAO Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries, the Catch Documentation Schemes Guidelines from FAO, we have a series of guidelines and instruments that can support both the government and the private sector in order to maximize the possibility of compliance with trade agreements, because those instruments increase their awareness of legality and sustainability of the products. So that's a very important aspect. Let's go. I think it's the last one, if I'm not mistaken. But again, please use the QR code before we move. Let's go for the next question. It's a very simple question, just to know if you are aware about those modern clauses that goes for the environmental side in trade agreements. Are you aware that now there is requirements for IEU fishing, for sustainable food systems in trade agreements, that sometimes you already face it preferential access using trade agreements? So it's a very simple question, but just to know if you are, and it's funny because, oh no, there's a small difference. Okay, just to see if we have so far 14. That's more like a curious question from our side to see if those modern causes already have been noticed by you. Maybe we can show the results. Yes, no, that's good. The majority of you are already aware of those modern clauses in trade agreements. That's very good to know. So yes, and indeed, as I mentioned, that's a trend in terms of having each time more similar clauses in trade agreements. So let's go back to the presentation. The idea of this overall presentation since the beginning, it is basically to show how interconnected and complex fisheries and aquaculture products can be. Much more complex than other animal proteins, like beef, like pork, like poultry. And this is very interesting because when you think about the value chain, of course, this is a very simplified value chain. But sometimes fish can be produced in one country, harvested in another, processing in another, distributed and consumed in another. That creates, of course, possibilities because of export, of value added, etc. But at the same time, it can create problems. And what are the problems that we are talking about? We have seen very clearly during the COVID times how long value chains like the fisheries, that you catch the fish in one place, sometimes you process in another country, and then you export to a third country, etc. How we have been impacted during COVID because of the blockage of ports, because of the blockage of the movement of people, etc. So this is a negative effect of having very complex and long value chains. We mentioned that fisheries and aquaculture products is a commodity that is very associated with international trade. We saw that how international trade, as I mentioned, 49% of the value of the animal proteins around the world is from fisheries and aquaculture products in comparison with poultry, pork, and beef. But since fisheries and aquaculture is very associated with international trade, we face the problem of freight costs. And this is the graph that shows sometimes how freight can increase during specific times of the last 3 years, in fact, here. And we are all seeing the problems in terms of the water scarcity in the Panama Channel that creates more problem for vessels to navigate. We all see the piracy in the coast of many countries. So this create problems also for fisheries. And of course, the changes in consumer preferences. And that was even a fact that it was a little bit exacerbated during COVID. During COVID, we have seen a lot of change in the way that people prepare food. I think particularly in Thailand, because here you eat a lot outside. And during COVID, probably have to eat to fix your food at home. So it was quite a change in terms of the how you cook. But again, all those challenges, they also show to us some opportunities. And what do we mean by that? For example, in terms of, I mentioned to you that fisheries and aquaculture, they have usually very long value chains. It can be produced in one country, exported to another, processed, and re-exported to another for consumption. But for example, shrimp, they have very short cycles. So if there is a crisis, shrimp can respond easily to adjustments in the production than other species. And in the case of Thailand, of course, you have a significant advantage with shrimp. During COVID, we have seen something very interesting. Because it's very common, and that occurs also in Southeast Asia, that some very high value species of fisheries and aquaculture products, they are usually sold to restaurants and hotels because they are very exclusive, etc. But of course, during COVID, the restaurants were closed and the hotels with no one because nobody could travel. So what happened is that those producers of high quality fish, they start shifting their production to local supermarkets so that the consumers can buy directly high value fish. And when the COVID peak was reduced and the restaurants and the hotels were open, what happened is that many of those producers, they kept the two markets. So they continue selling to the local markets because they have opened those markets during the COVID pandemic, but they also return to the hotels and restaurants. So it was an increase in terms of the market access for them. That was very positive. And that's exactly sometimes when you to think about local and international, not only put all your eggs in the same basket. Try to mix between markets, local and international, because if there is an international crisis, you still have your local market and vice versa. During COVID too, we have seen new package in terms of products because people start buying a lot and also storing at home. We have seen the development of new packing material that created new opportunity for fisheries and aquaculture products. And of course, on the demand side, we are seeing an increasing demand for fisheries and aquaculture products in terms of being healthy food with more nutrients, and particularly from the young generations in terms of eating more fish in general, eat a lot of Japanese food, which is very common among the young generation. Also, home cooking, that's something that was increased during the COVID. Many home cooking habits, they remain after COVID. So sometimes people still cook 1 or 2 times per week at home. And of course, in the case of fisheries and aquaculture products, HoReCa is hotel, restaurants, and catering. We cannot put that aside because it's quite important, the demand of hotel, restaurants, and catering of fisheries and aquaculture products, and of course, the final consumers. So we continue to have increasing opportunities for fisheries and aquaculture products. And since I mentioned the issue of the private sector being aware of preferential access, for example, if that product can be exported to a specific country at a reduced import rate, information is key in terms of fisheries and access and aquaculture products. We have to have more information We know that sometimes information is not disseminated in a very equal way. So some big companies, they have sometimes more access to information than other medium-sized companies and also some cooperatives. And that's why I'm going to show to you some products that we developed in Globefish that can facilitate in Globefish FAO, that can facilitate information dissemination. We have this publication called Globefish Highlights. We release this publication every quarter with an analysis of 13 fish species in terms of production, export, import, and prices. And you can download for free, of course, the publication here. In addition to that, so the Goldfish Highlights is the main publication that we have, and we release that every quarter. But on a monthly basis, we have the European price report, with 700 prices of different products in Europe. And that's a very interesting publication with also some analysis too. That's for, sorry. And we have the Chinese fish price report, which is, FAO is one of the only bodies in the world that release information about prices in China. So those are these, we have some species that are monitored in China that we release information about. And on our website, we have a dashboard with European prices that is updated weekly. So you can create your own graphs based on the species that you select, the port that you can set filters here to choose the port, to choose the preservation method or the species that you want, and you can generate and download the graph and the information that you want. In addition to that, we have this publication that is highly relevant. I suggest that you download, which is the HS codes for fisheries and aquaculture products. For some of you that already deals with international markets, you know about the coding of the products. But we have developed this publication together with the World Customs Organization. And what we try to do is to create more understandable description of fisheries and aquaculture products. And what do I mean by that? Sometimes when we work with the nomenclature and the code of fisheries and aquaculture products, we have like other frozen tuna. What's other frozen tuna means? We do not know. So here in this publication, we have put tuna frozen, except bluefin tuna, except bonito, and we have created a full description of the product so that we know exactly what is included and what is excluded. So that was a very interesting tool. We have released a new version with pictures and the main characteristics, the main physical characteristics of the main traded species. You have for salmon here. This is a very interesting area of the Globefish website for the private sector. We have a summary of the border rejections of fisheries and aquaculture products by major import markets. So you can navigate here and see why the European Union, why Japan, why the US, and why Australia are blocking the entrance of fisheries and aquaculture product. What is the scientific basis for that blockage? So that's a very interesting statistics that we collect. And as I mentioned to you, the one that I showed for Thailand, we have for many countries, the Globefish market profiles that you can download. So you can access all the resources that I have mentioned here in this presentation at this QR code. It's easy, and we keep this QR code also updated. So you just put in your favorites the website, and you can check periodically. And there is also information about my email address. You can contact me for anything that any information that that you might need. And one thing that I want to highlight before we finish is that we wish that FAO could be closer to the private sector in terms of being a direct link between the needs of the private sector and the type of information that we can provide. We can adjust our information style. For example, we can receive suggestions from you in terms of, oh, why don't you put information about X, Y, and Z? Just to let you know, we are planning to launch soon, I hope until the end of this year, a basic guidelines on how to export fisheries and aquaculture products to China, European Union, and the US. So we are going to try to simplify the rules and show in a very user-friendly way so that that can facilitate the private sector to export their products. Just to finalize, and then I have my contact here. We, of course, we are going to circulate the presentation later. It's not here. There's the last slide. Okay, we have just a last slide that we want you to scan because it's basically two issues. I show you a lot of information that Globefish, which is a FAO project, releases. The publication, the information about the codes, and other areas. And one issue that is quite interesting is that this year, Globefish is going to celebrate its 40th anniversary. And we are going to have 2-day celebration in Rome with an event that's going to be webcasted. So you can join the event, listen to the latest trends of fisheries and aquaculture products. It's going to have a specific section on seaweeds that we are going to host. So the first QR code here is to register for this event of Globefish. And the second QR, sorry about a lot of QR codes, and the second QR code here is a short questionnaire that if you want to answer and continue to receive information from FAO, you just put your email address together with some basic answers, and we are going to send you, put you in the mailing list for new publications in the area of markets and trade, but also any other instrument that FAO launches, including events and other open participation, open events to the participation of the public. Once again, I would like to thank the Department of Fisheries for this opportunity for FAO. I would like to thank all the participants of this seminar. And I think I'm open for questions or comments. And thank you again. Kakunklap.
ขอบคุณนะครับทางท่านวิทยากรจาก FAO นะครับในส่วนของกรมประมงครับก็จะขออนุญาตให้ข้อมูลเพิ่มเติมนะครับในส่วนนี้เนื่องจากตามกำหนดการเดิมเนี่ยอาจจะมีการพักเบรกด้วยแต่ว่าด้วยช่วงเวลาที่รวบรัดเพื่อให้ทุกท่านไม่ต้องเสียเวลาครับทางท่านวิทยากรก็ได้ดำเนินการมาถึงในตรงขั้นตอนสุดท้ายครับทำให้ทุกท่านเนี่ยได้เห็นเรื่องตั้งแต่ช่วงแรกเรื่องของกราฟที่จะแสดงแนวโน้มต่างๆนะครับแล้วก็มีเรื่องของโอกาสต่างๆครับทั้งที่ในช่วงโควิดที่ผ่านมาครับมันมีช่องทางใหม่ๆเกิดขึ้นมาในการที่จะจำหน่ายสินค้าสัตว์น้ำครับแต่ว่าปัจจุบันเมื่อสถานการณ์เริ่มคลี่คลายเนี่ยตัวช่องทางนั้นก็ยังคงอยู่ซึ่งก็จะเป็นข้อดีว่ามันมีการเพิ่มช่องทางในการจำหน่ายมากขึ้นนะครับซึ่งสอดคล้องกับทางกรมประมงประเทศไทยนะครับในส่วนของที่ทางกระทรวงเกษตรและสหกรณ์ครับได้มีนโยบายให้จัดทำเรื่องของช่องทางการตลาดให้แก่เกษตรกรนะครับเรื่องของ Fisherman Shop ซึ่งในส่วนนี้ก็เป็นแนวทางที่สอดคล้องซึ่งปัจจุบันเนี่ยก็ยังคงมีอยู่ทั่วประเทศนะครับ 76จังหวัดนะครับโดยประมาณนี้ครับแล้วก็ในส่วนที่ภาคเอกชนเนี่ยจะได้รับทราบเรื่องของสิทธิพิเศษต่างๆครับเกี่ยวข้องกับภาษีสรรพากรซึ่งก็จะเป็นประโยชน์ว่าถ้าเรามีข้อมูลในส่วนนี้แล้วเนี่ยเราจะผลักดันในสินค้าของเอกชนอย่างไรครับในเรื่องของประเทศไทยด้วยนะครับซึ่งเอโบก็มีช่องทางต่างๆที่เผยแพร่ไว้เรื่องของ GoFit ซึ่งในปีนี้ก็เป็นปีครบรอบ 40 ปีอย่างที่ทุกท่านได้ยินจากทางท่านวิทยากรคุณมาซิโอนะครับซึ่งสามารถลงทะเบียนเข้าร่วมสัมมนาซึ่งเป็นระดับโลกเลยนะครับก็เป็นประโยชน์ในการที่ประเทศสมาชิกต่างๆแล้วก็ผู้สนใจเนี่ยได้เข้าร่วมนะครับในส่วนของข้อมูลต่างๆเนี่ยได้มีการเผยแพร่ไว้ในช่วงของ QR code ที่คุณมาโซได้ให้ข้อมูลไว้ครับซึ่งในส่วนนี้ทางกรมประมงก็จะรวบรวมข้อมูลจากทาง FAO ครับส่งให้ทางอีเมลที่ลงทะเบียนไว้นะครับ แล้วก็ส่วนสำคัญที่ในรุ่นนี้ครับเกี่ยวข้องกับเรื่องของภาคเอกชนนะครับทาง FAO ก็ได้ระบุว่าก็ต้องการที่จะมีส่วนร่วมมากขึ้นแล้วก็มีการทำงานร่วมกันมากขึ้นนะครับช่องทางที่ FAO เนี่ยมีการจัดทำข้อมูลไว้เยอะแยะมากมายครับเป็นข้อมูลระดับโลกแต่ว่าอาจจะมีช่องทางการเผยแพร่ที่ยังไม่ไปครอบคลุมไปถึงทุกภาคส่วนนะครับครั้งนี้ก็มีข้อข้อคิดเห็นหรือว่าแนวโน้มที่ดีครับที่ที่โบจะมีการจัดเตรียมข้อมูลแล้วก็มีการเปิดตัวในรอบเร็วๆนี้นะครับว่าจะมีช่องทางการแพทย์ที่ชัดเจนมากขึ้นในทุกๆด้านนะครับแล้วก็ในส่วนที่เป็นQR code ต่างๆที่มีมากมายเนี่ยมันก็จะมีการเข้าถึงข้อมูลต่างๆที่ทุกท่านจะได้รับประโยชน์ในส่วนนี้นะครับก็ไม่ต้องกังวลในส่วนที่ยังไม่มีตัวรายละเอียดของเอกสารประกอบการประชุมนะครับหรือการฝึกอบรมเนี่ยก็จะได้รับทางอีเมลทุกท่านนะครับ ก็ในส่วนนี้จะขออนุญาตให้เอ่อสแกน QR code ในส่วนที่ของ FAO ครับมีการประเมินต่างๆสั้นๆไม่กี่ข้อนะครับถ้าเรียบร้อยแล้วเนี่ยทางกรมประมงครับในนามผู้จัดก็จะขออนุญาตให้ทุกท่านเนี่ยช่วยประเมินแบบประเมินความพึงพอใจในเรื่องของโครงการในรุ่นที่2ด้วยนะครับซึ่งแบบประเมินนี้ก็จะใช้รวมกันตั้งแต่รุ่น1ถึงรุ่น3นะครับก็ขออนุญาตให้ทางเจ้าหน้าที่ไอทีขึ้นตัว QR code ตรงนี้ด้วยนะครับก็ขออนุญาตให้เวลาสั้นๆส่วนนี้ครับ แต่ระหว่างที่ท่านกรุณาให้ข้อมูลในส่วนนี้นะครับก็จะมีเรื่องของตัวคำถามต่างๆมีไหมครับโอเคในเรื่องของคำถามเนี่ยเนื่องจากช่องทางตอนนี้ครับมีการเผยแพร่ให้เข้าถึงได้มากขึ้นทั้งเรื่องของทางZoom ครับแล้วก็ทาง YouTube ครับซึ่งตามที่ได้เรียนในช่วงแรกครับว่าจะมีการรวบรวมลิงก์วิดีโอเรคคอร์ดิ้งตรงเนี้ยเผยแพร่ไปทางเว็บไซต์ของกรมประมงนะครับ แล้วก็เป็นช่องทางของสถานีต้นแบบของกรมประมงซึ่งก็จะรวบรวมส่งให้ทางผู้เข้าร่วมฝึกอบรมทุกท่านทางอีเมลนะครับตัวนี้สามารถดูย้อนหลังทบทวนข้อมูลแล้วก็ดูไปถึงรุ่นแรกครับที่เป็นเรื่องของภาครัฐซึ่งมีการฝึกอบรมเข้มข้น4วันนะครับซึ่งส่วนนี้ก็จะเป็นประโยชน์อย่างมากครับสำหรับรุ่นที่2รุ่นนี้เกี่ยวกับภาคเอกชนครับก็ทุกท่านได้เข้าฟังแล้วก็มีบันทึกรายละเอียดตรงนี้ไว้ด้วยนะครับสามารถดูย้อนหลังด้วย แล้วประกอบกับช่วงบ่ายครับจะเป็นรุ่นของนักศึกษาครับเป็นเรื่องของโอกาสต่างๆในเรื่องของการทำงานครับก็จะมีบันทึกไว้เช่นกันนะครับในเรื่องของคำถามต่างๆเท่าที่ตรวจสอบเนี่ยอาจจะไม่มีมากมายก็จะถ้ามีอะไรตกหล่นเนี่ยจะขออนุญาตรวบรวมข้อมูลตัวนี้แล้วก็สอบถามไปที่ FO แล้วก็อาจจะเผยแพร่ไปทางภาพรวมของตัวเว็บอีเมลของท่านทุกท่านนะครับครับขอบคุณมากครับ ตอนนี้ยังพอมีช่วงเวลาช่วงท้ายๆนะครับก็ถ้าทุกท่านยังไม่ได้ออกจากซูมแล้วก็ที่ห้องประชุมครับในส่วนของ QR code ก็ยังคงแสดงไว้หน้าจอเนาะแล้วก็เอ่อทราบว่าบางท่านยังไม่สามารถเข้า QR code ของแบบประเมินได้นะครับก็จะขออนุญาตลองปรับแก้ไขถ้าเกิดไม่ทันในช่วงนี้จะขออนุญาตส่งไปทางอีเมลด้วยนะครับแต่ถ้าทันเนี่ยจะขออนุญาตส่งไปทางตัวอินบ็อกซ์ของ Zoom นะครับ
I have a question for Mr. Marcio. Can I go ahead? Okay, so Mr. Marcio, do you think that entering the FTA make preferential trade on fishery lower, such as Thai and EU free trade area?
No, definitely. I think one of the main objectives of the FTA is indeed to reduce import tariffs. So definitely, one as I mentioned in the slide that shows the summary of the free trade agreement, and usually the negotiations are like that. Now Thailand and the European Union is negotiating the text of the agreement. And after that, it's going to negotiate the list of products. In this negotiation of a list of products, there are many modalities. There is no preset modality. It depends on the interest of the countries that they are negotiating at that time. But usually, how it happened is that each country offers the list of products that they are interested in having the import tariff reduced by the other country. So Thailand is going to build a list of products that they want the European Union to have the import tax reduced. Of course, I'm not talking only about fishery. It's going to be the whole list of products for everything. And the European Union is going to do the same. So what we call that there is an interchange of lists. That's usually the first movement. And then each side is going to analyze what are the requests of the other side. So Thailand is going to analyze what the European Union is requesting, and the European Union is going to analyze what Thailand is requesting. And then they are going to sit together based on this list to negotiate. What can happen? Usually, in some negotiation, I'm not telling that is going to be the case of this one, but in some negotiations, some countries, they identify what they call sensitive products. And for those sensitive products, usually they are excluded from any reduction. So a country A can identify that, for example, Apple, in my country, I don't want to import Apple. And that's going to be, Apple is not going to have any reduction in the free trade agreement. However, one important aspect is that for a free trade agreement to be considered consistent with the rules of the World Trade Organization, the free trade agreement has to contemplate more than 90% of the trade flow between the countries. So in this regard, countries cannot start excluding a lot of products because of sensitivity issues, because then the FTA is not going to become compatible with the World Trade Organization. And so there is this possibility of some products being excluded of the negotiation process because they are sensible products. There is another possibility, is that for products that are sensitive, but not with, let's call that way, not with a high degree of sensitivity, but they are somehow sensitive. Countries usually do the following. They say that, okay, I'm going to reduce the tariff, but I'm not going to reduce the tariff in day one. I'm going to create a schedule of 10 years, for example, and every year I'm going to reduce a little bit the tariff. And that I'm going to reach the peak of reduction after 10 years. That's also a possibility. So it depends on the negotiation process. It depends on the interests of each country involved in the negotiation. And of course, we all know that usually there is a very interesting scale of need of developed countries from products from Thailand. That's a positive aspect because they want to receive more products at lower prices. And then if the import rate is reduced to zero, it's going to be more competitive. That's a very positive side. But we also know that many European Union countries, they are very important processors of fish products, including tuna. So there is also this internal challenge that's going to be part of the negotiation process. But again, it's going to be something that it's going to be negotiated by the trade negotiators of Thailand and the European Union in this process of exchange of lists. And usually, in the case of the European Union, usually the majority of the reduction is immediately. There is no decrease every year, as I mentioned, as an exception. So that's the overall scenario. But of course, it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know if any other question or comment.
ตอนนี้ข้อมูลใน Zoom ยังไม่มีคำถามเพิ่มเติมนะครับ นะครับครับไม่ทราบมีคำถามเพิ่มเติมจากทางผู้เข้าร่วมประชุมผ่านระบบออนไลน์ไหมครับทราบว่าทุกท่านจะได้รับข้อมูลครบถ้วนในส่วนที่ทางวิทยากรได้นำเสนอนะครับแต่อย่างไรก็ตามครับหากมีคำถามเพิ่มเติมภายหลังก็สามารถส่งเข้าทางอีเมลครับโดยตรงที่คุณมาซิโอ FO ตามที่ให้ไว้ได้นะครับหรือประสานมาที่กรมมงครับตามหนังสือที่เคยแจ้งเวียนไว้ครับจะมีช่องทางของผู้ประสานงานในส่วนนี้นะครับอ่า
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much again. And as it was mentioned, we keep open for any additional information that you might need. So do not hesitate to email us in FAO. You have all the contact details in the presentation, and we are open to receive any request or for information or any support that you might need. Thank you again. We really appreciate your participation here. Takon Kap.
ขอบคุณนะครับอย่างไรทุกท่านที่อยู่ในระบบ Zoom ก็สามารถรบกวนแบบประเมินได้ต่อนะครับไม่แน่ใจหากท่านใดติดก็แจ้งด้วยนะครับได้ไหมครับ
Very, very sweet. And for example, in my computer, you on the address, you have a button that you generate a QR code automatically. For Okay, so well, this year message you. Okay.
So I see based on what I with at land that's the main academic that's the number so that then bring very like so that's been there investment this needs to be that type of thing. But in Thailand, British very constrained so that is really cost.